This is pure nonsense. Gerald's voice exploded across the glass-walled conference room, loud enough to bounce back at me from every direction. He picked up my presentation slides, the ones I had stayed up nights refining, and waved them in the air like they were contaminated. This will implode the moment it touches real-world operations. Did anyone here actually review this before we wasted the board's time? I stood at the front of the boardroom in Salt Lake City, my fingers gripping the edge of the table so tightly my knuckles had gone white. Around the table sat the full executive team. Some avoided my eyes. Some looked uncomfortable. A few smirked, clearly amused by Gerald's performance. 8 months. 8 months of my life were being shredded in under 15 minutes. My name is Hannah, and I was 29 years old when everything I thought I had built came crashing down in that room. I had been a senior operations analyst at North Crest Engineering for 3 years. I believed in the company. I believed in the work. And I truly believed that what I had created could change how the entire organization functioned. The idea itself was simple. The execution was not. I had designed an efficiency optimization system, software that analyzed workflows in real time, identified inefficiencies as they happened, and suggested corrections automatically. Not quarterly reviews. Not static reports that were outdated the moment they were printed. Live data. Live insight. Real results. The pilot program showed a 55% reduction in wasted resources. 55. That wasn't a rounding error. That wasn't a small win. That was transformational. I had documentation. Case studies. Projections. Financial models. Everything pointed to this being exactly what North Crest needed. Everything except Gerald. Gerald had never liked me. I knew that from my first week on the job. He was in his late 50s, one of those men who had climbed the ladder in a different era, when longevity mattered more than adaptability. He didn't hate incompetence. He hated disruption. And I represented everything that made his position feel unstable. Hannah thinks she can revolutionize our entire operation with some app she cobbled together, he continued, his voice dripping with condescension. Tell me, Hannah, did you even consider infrastructure costs? Training? System failures? Or did you just assume reality would cooperate? I took a breath. Slow. Controlled. I did consider all of that, I said. The implementation costs are detailed in the financial breakdown on page 12. Training requirements are minimal because the interface is intuitive. And the system includes multiple safeguards to prevent, he cut me off with a laugh. You hear that? Safeguards. He shook his head. Listen, sweetheart. I've been doing this job since before you graduated high school. I know what works. This is amateur hour. Sweetheart. He actually called me sweetheart. In front of the board. Heat rushed to my face. I could feel it. Across the table, the CFO, Patricia, shifted like she wanted to say something. Then she didn't. No one did. Gerald had been there for 23 years. He had influence. Relationships. Wait. Challenging him wasn't worth the risk. The data supports this, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. If you would just review the pilot results are meaningless, Gerald snapped. You ran tests on a small team under controlled conditions. That proves nothing. In the real world, under actual pressure, this system collapses. It's fundamentally flawed. How is it flawed? I asked. Gerald leaned back, smiling like a man who thought he'd already won. Because it relies on theoretical efficiency models that ignore human behavior. People aren't robots. You can't optimize them like lines of code. That's exactly why it works, I said. It adapts to how people actually work. It identifies inefficiencies in the gaps. It's built around human behavior, not against it. He waved his hand dismissively. This conversation is over. The project is dead. We're not implementing this. And frankly, I'm disappointed we wasted resources on it at all. The silence afterward was suffocating. I stood there feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. 8 months of late nights. Skipped weekends. Cancelled plans. All of it erased with a sentence. I gathered my papers slowly. My hands were shaking, but I kept my face neutral. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. I'm done then, I said quietly. Gerald looked up. What? I'm done, I repeated. Louder this time. If this company doesn't value innovation, I don't see the value in staying. His expression shifted into something close to amusement. Are you threatening to quit? I'm not threatening anything, I said. I'm leaving. And you'll hear from me in 8 months. His smile widened. Is that a threat? No, I said. It's a promise. I walked out of that boardroom with my head high, even though inside I felt like I was falling apart. That afternoon, I cleaned out my desk. Coworkers watched quietly. A few offered hushed words of support. They all knew what had happened. Offices like that always knew. In the parking lot, Jenna from finance caught up to me as I loaded boxes into my car. Hannah, wait. Are you really leaving? I am. But your project, she said. Everyone knows it was solid. Gerald just hated that it made him look bad. I know, I said. But fighting him here won't change anything. So what are you going to do? I looked at her, and something inside me hardened into resolve. I'm going to prove him wrong. When I drove home that day, I kept waiting for the panic to hit. The kind that makes your hands go numb on the steering wheel and your throat tighten like you cannot swallow. It did not come right away. What came first was this eerie calm, like my brain had decided it was safer to go quiet than to process what had just happened. I pulled into my apartment complex, carried the boxes up the stairs, and set them down in the middle of my living room. I just stood there staring at them like they belonged to someone else. My badge. My laptop. My notebooks full of calculations. A company mug I never even liked. A framed photo of my parents that I had kept on my desk mostly out of habit. It was all proof that the last 3 years had been real. And also proof that it could all be taken away in 15 minutes by one man with a loud voice and enough power to make everyone else stay silent. That night, I sat on my couch with my laptop open and my resume pulled up on the screen, but I could not bring myself to apply for anything. I did not want another version of the same job in another version of the same company. Not when I knew what I was capable of. Not when I knew the work I had done was real. I kept hearing Gerald's laugh. Not even the words, just the laugh. Like my effort was something silly. Like I was a child playing at being important. By midnight, the calm finally cracked. I started doing the math. Rent, utilities, groceries, car payment, health insurance. I had enough savings to cover about 3 months if I was careful. Maybe 4 if I ate like a college student and stopped buying anything that was not essential. After that, I was done. The terrifying part was that I did not regret leaving. I regretted believing they would ever see me clearly. I stared at my laptop until my eyes burned, then I opened a folder I had created months ago, a folder Gerald never knew existed. It held every line of code I had written, every set of results from the pilot, every document and graph and breakdown I had built. My system. Mine. I had worked on it after hours. Weekends. Late nights at my kitchen table. On my own computer. With tools I paid for. I had been careful, not because I expected to quit, but because some part of me never trusted Gerald to play fair. I clicked into the code and scrolled slowly, like I was reminding myself it was real. I had built something valuable. Something that worked. So why did it feel like I was the one being thrown away? Because in places like North Crest, value only mattered if the right person claimed it. And Gerald had decided I did not get to be that person. That is when the next thought came, quiet but sharp. Fine. If they would not implement it, I would. It sounded insane at first. Starting a company was something other people did. People with connections. People with money. People whose parents had business experience and knew what words to use in meetings. I was just an operations analyst with a bruised ego and a project Gerald called nonsense. But then I remembered something my father used to say when I was a kid and I got discouraged in school. If you can explain it clearly, you understand it. I understood my system. I understood the problem it solved. I understood the market it could serve. So maybe the real question was not if I could build it. Maybe the real question was if I could stop asking permission. The next morning, I made coffee, sat at my table, and started researching like my life depended on it, because it did. How to register a business in Utah. What an LLC actually protected you from. How angel investment worked. What the difference was between a client and a partner. How founders paid themselves. How startups failed. I watched videos until my brain felt full. I read articles that made entrepreneurship sound glamorous, then read other articles that made it sound like voluntary suffering. By the end of the day, I had a legal pad covered in messy notes and a new kind of fear sitting in my stomach. Not the fear of Gerald. Not the fear of being judged. The fear of stepping into a world where there would be no one to blame if I failed. But that fear was cleaner. It felt honest. By the end of the week, one name kept appearing in my research, Vivian Park, an early-stage investor based in Salt Lake City who had a reputation for funding unusual ideas. People said she did not care if a founder came from a perfect background. She cared if the idea solved something real. I found her email through a business directory and stared at the blank message window for almost an hour. Every time I typed, I deleted it. Hi Vivian, I have an idea. Delete. I built a system. Delete. I was humiliated in a boardroom. Delete. That last one sounded dramatic. Weak. Like I wanted sympathy. I did not want sympathy. I wanted someone to look at the work. So I wrote it differently. I introduced myself. I described the system in plain language. I attached pilot results, trimmed down to the clearest metrics. I explained the market, the companies that needed this, the money it could save. I kept it concise, confident, and factual. Then I hit send before I could talk myself out of it. 2 days later, Vivian replied. She wanted to meet. I read the email 3 times just to make sure it was real. We met at a coffee shop downtown. I arrived early, mostly so I could sit in the corner and watch the door like I was preparing for a threat. Vivian walked in right on time. She was early 40s, sharply dressed, eyes that missed nothing. She did not smile too quickly. She did not waste movement. She looked like someone who had spent her life making decisions that mattered. She sat down across from me and got straight to it. Walk me through it, she said. So I did. I explained the problem first. The waste, the inefficiency, the way operations teams were forced to react instead of predict. Then I explained the system. Real-time monitoring. Adaptive modeling. Suggestions that accounted for human variability instead of pretending people were machines. Vivian asked questions that were sharp enough to make me sweat. What data sources did the system need? How easy was integration? How would we handle privacy? How would we price it? What proof did we have outside the pilot? I answered everything I could, and when I did not know something, I said I did not know and explained how I would find out. She watched me the entire time, like she was not just evaluating the system, she was evaluating me. Finally, she leaned back. This is interesting, she said. Interesting. Not amazing. Not brilliant. Not life-changing. Just interesting. My stomach sank, but I kept my face still. Then she added, "Why did you leave your job to pursue it?" I paused. This was the part one had not rehearsed. I could have softened it. I could have said I wanted more freedom. I could have claimed it was a planned transition. But Vivian's eyes told me she would smell that lie before I finished speaking. So I told her the truth. I told her about the boardroom. About Gerald calling it nonsense. About the way everyone stayed quiet. About the way my work was killed not because it failed, but because it threatened the wrong man's ego. And I told her about the moment I walked out. Vivian's mouth tilted slightly, like she was almost amused. Good, she said. I blinked. Good? You have something to prove, she said. That is strong fuel if you don't let it turn you bitter. I did not know what to say to that, so I just nodded. She tapped a finger lightly on the table. I want you to meet two people. Within a week, I was sitting in a small conference room pitching the system again, this time to two angel investors Vivian trusted. One was a former tech founder who cared about scaling. The other was a former CFO who cared about numbers and risk. They asked hard questions too, but it felt different. They weren't laughing. They weren't trying to humiliate me. They were trying to understand. 3 weeks after I quit North Crest, I had enough funding to register a startup, rent a tiny office, and hire 2 junior developers to help me scale the prototype. When I signed the lease, my hand shook so badly I had to pause before writing my name. I named the company Streamline Solutions because I didn't want something clever. I wanted something clear. I wanted the name to sound like the product, simple and direct. The first day in that office, the space felt almost empty. 2 desks. 1 whiteboard. A few folding chairs. No fancy lobby. No receptionist. No executive team. Just me, a dream, and the terrifying weight of responsibility. The first week, I worked 16-hour days. Not because anyone demanded it, but because everything depended on me. I learned how to manage cash flow and investor updates. I learned how to onboard developers. I learned that every decision had consequences, even the ones that seemed small. I made mistakes immediately. I underestimated how long it would take to refactor parts of the code for scale. I underestimated how much legal paperwork would cost. I underestimated how exhausting it was to lead while still building. But the system kept getting better. Every iteration made it faster. Smarter. More intuitive. And the strangest part was this. Even on the days I was scared out of my mind, I felt more respected than I ever did at North Crest. Because here, the only voice that could dismiss me was my own. By the end of the second month, we had a beta version ready. And now came the part that made my stomach flip again. We had to put it in front of real companies. Not a pilot team in a friendly environment, but decision makers who would either pay for it or ignore it. The night before I started reaching out, I sat alone in the office, staring at the contact list I'd built, companies I thought might take a chance. I thought about Gerald saying it would collapse in the real world. Then I whispered it out loud, just to hear how it sounded in the empty room. No, the first company I contacted was a small logistics firm on the outskirts of Provo. Not because they were ideal, but because they were reachable. I found the operations manager's email buried on their website and sent a message that took me an hour to write and rewrite until it sounded confident without sounding desperate. I offered them a free trial. No contracts. No commitment. Just real data in exchange for honest feedback. They replied the next morning. Sure. Can't hurt, the email said. That sentence scared me more than rejection ever could. Because now there was nowhere to hide. The onboarding took a full day. We integrated their workflow data, mapped their processes, and calibrated the system to their operation. I stayed late that night, watching the dashboard populate with live data, my heart racing every time a new metric appeared. By the end of the first week, the system flagged 3 inefficiencies that the company had accepted as just how things are. Redundant approvals. Bottlenecks caused by outdated scheduling assumptions. Resource allocation mismatches that no one had questioned in years. I scheduled a call with their operations manager to walk through the findings. He was quiet as I explained. Then he said, "We've been complaining about these issues for years." I waited. "No one ever showed us where they were actually coming from," he finished. By the end of the month, they had reduced operational waste by 48%. 48. I sat in my car after that call and cried, not because I was overwhelmed, but because I felt vindicated in a way that went deeper than anger. The system worked. Not in theory. Not in a controlled pilot. In the real world. Word traveled faster than I expected. One small business told another. Then another. Within weeks, I had a waiting list. Manufacturing firms. Distribution centers. Regional suppliers. All curious. All cautious. All willing to test. I charged nothing at first. That terrified my investors, but Vivian backed me. "Proof first," she said. Money later. By month 3, the results were impossible to ignore. One manufacturer cut costs by 52%. Another reduced turnaround times so dramatically they renegotiated contracts with their largest clients. The data embarrassed industry standards. That was when something shifted. People stopped asking if the system worked and started asking how fast they could get it. 5 months after I walked out of North Crest, I found myself standing in a polished conference room across town, pitching Streamline Solutions to executives from Velthor Industries, one of the largest tech conglomerates in the region. They had heard about the beta results. Someone on their operations team had forwarded an internal memo with my company's name circled in red. I set up the demo with steady hands, even though my pulse was loud in my ears. I walked them through a live simulation. Real-time analysis. Adaptive recommendations. Predictive modeling that adjusted based on human behavior instead of pretending people were machines. They asked hard questions. Technical ones. Financial ones. Strategic ones. I answered all of them. At the far end of the table sat Douglas, head of acquisitions. He didn't interrupt. He just watched. When I finished, he leaned back. "This is impressive," he said. "How big is your team?" 3 full-time developers, I said. 1 part-time consultant. And me. He raised an eyebrow. "You built this with 4 people?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "We've been considering building something similar in-house." "I know," I said. "And it would take you 2 years and millions of dollars to get close to this." The room went quiet. Douglas smiled, just slightly. "Confident." "Realistic," I corrected. The meeting ended without promises. Just polite handshakes and vague timelines. I told myself not to hope. 3 days later, Douglas called me directly. Velthor didn't want to license the software. They wanted to buy the company. The number he quoted didn't feel real. It sounded like a typo. Like something meant for someone else's life. Enough to pay back every investor 10 times over. Enough to take care of my parents. Enough to never again worry about rent, groceries, or how long my savings would last. I sat in my tiny office, staring at the offer, and thought about Gerald. About him laughing. About him calling my work nonsense. About him killing the project not because it was flawed, but because it scared him. And then I thought about something better than revenge. I wanted him to know. I called Jenna, my friend from finance who still worked at North Crest. "Can you do me a favor?" I asked. "Depends," she said. "How illegal is it?" "I need to know when the next board meeting is." She hesitated. "Why?" "Just trust me." 2 weeks later, on the same day Velthor publicly announced the acquisition, I sent Gerald a thank you card. Not an email. Not a message. A card. Inside, I wrote a single paragraph in my neatest handwriting. "Thank you for teaching me that sometimes the best opportunities come from knowing when to walk away." I hope you've been following the news. Not so nonsense now, huh? I signed my name. And I included a printed copy of the press release announcing Velthor's acquisition of Streamline Solutions for $120 million. Jenna called me 2 days later, laughing so hard she had to pull over. Everyone is talking about your card, she said. Someone took a picture of it. It's everywhere. What did he do? I asked. He turned red. Locked himself in his office for an hour. Then came out pretending nothing happened. Patricia actually went down to his floor to ask why he shut your project down so fast. The satisfaction hit deeper than I expected. Not because I'd embarrassed him, but because the truth was finally louder than his voice. The story didn't stay inside North Crest. It spread through industry forums, then social media, then business news. My thank you card became shorthand for poetic justice. A symbol of what happens when arrogance collides with reality. Journalists reached out. Podcasts asked for interviews. I declined most of them. I didn't want to be a spectacle. I did agree to one interview with a local tech publication. The headline read, "Local engineer turns rejection into $120 million success." When they asked about North Crest, I stayed professional. There are companies that encourage innovation, I said. And companies that fear it. I'm grateful I found people who believed in what I was building. North Crest's name showed up anyway. Repeatedly. Not kindly. Through Jenna, I heard that Gerald was under serious scrutiny. The board wanted to know how many other ideas had been dismissed. How many opportunities had been quietly killed. But by then, my attention was elsewhere. Streamline Solutions was integrating into Velthor's systems. I stayed on as a consultant, working with teams that had resources I'd never imagined. Massive computing power. Brilliant engineers. Global reach. Douglas invited me into strategy meetings. They saw my system as the foundation for an entire new product suite. One afternoon, he asked me what I wanted to do next. You could stay, he said. Lead the next generation of this technology. Full team. Full budget. Complete control. It was tempting. But something in my chest resisted. Can I think about it? I asked. Of course. That night, I met Vivian for dinner. She studied me over her glass of wine. You're not excited. I am, I said. But I think I miss building from nothing. She smiled. Then don't choose safe. Her words lingered. And as the applause from my so-called victory faded, I realized something uncomfortable and true. Proving Gerald wrong had been satisfying. But it wasn't enough. The attention didn't slow down after that article. If anything, it multiplied. My inbox filled with messages from people I'd never met, engineers, analysts, product managers, all telling versions of the same story. They had ideas that worked. They had data. They had prototypes. And somewhere above them sat someone like Gerald who had decided it was safer to kill the idea than risk being outshined by it. At first, I answered politely and moved on. I was still in the middle of the acquisition transition, still figuring out what my role at Velthor would look like, still catching my breath after everything that had happened so fast. Then one message stopped me. It was from a woman named Claire in Denver. She worked in inventory management for a manufacturing company and had built a system that reduced overstock waste by nearly 40%. Her supervisor refused to pass it upward because it wasn't part of her job description. She wrote, "I was about to quit and go back to school because I thought maybe I just wasn't cut out for this industry. Then I read about you. I gave my notice yesterday. I'm terrified, but I'm also relieved. Thank you for showing me it was possible." I stared at that message longer than I should have. Because I knew exactly how that relief felt. That terrifying mix of freedom and fear when you finally choose yourself. I replied immediately. We exchanged emails. Then calls. I connected her with Vivian and another investor I trusted. Watching her confidence grow as people actually listened to her ideas did something to me. It felt different from my own success. Deeper. That was when the idea formed, quietly at first. I didn't want another corporate role. I didn't want another startup with my name on it. What I wanted was to make sure people like Claire didn't have to burn their lives down just to be taken seriously. I pitched the idea to Vivian over lunch. An angel fund focused specifically on projects that had been rejected by established institutions. Not half-baked ideas, but real solutions killed by ego, fear, or outdated leadership. She didn't hesitate. "That's exactly what you should do," she said. "You understand the problem from the inside." We moved fast. I allocated part of the acquisition money. Brought in 2 additional partners with complementary expertise. Set strict criteria. Evidence over hype. Impact over polish. Within weeks of announcing the fund quietly, applications poured in. And while I was building this next chapter, North Crest was falling apart. Jenna called me one evening, her voice tight. "Things are bad here," she said. "Really bad." After my card went viral, the board had started digging. Consultants were brought in. Internal audits followed. What they found went far beyond my situation. Gerald hadn't just blocked my project. He'd systematically undermined innovation for years. Projects delayed until they died. Data buried. Junior employees discouraged until they quit or stopped trying. At least 8 major initiatives documented. Millions in lost opportunity. Then came the part that made my stomach drop. "He's trying to go after you," Jenna said. "What do you mean?" I asked. "He's telling the board you stole company intellectual property. That Streamline was built on North Crest time using company resources. He wants them to sue." I felt cold all over. It was absurd. And terrifying. The letter from North Crest's legal team arrived the next morning, formal and aggressive. Demands. Accusations. Threats masked as procedure. I called Beverly immediately. She laughed when she read it. Not amused. Disgusted. "This is desperation," she said. "They don't have a case, but we still need to crush it." We responded fast. Time-stamped files. Purchase receipts. Emails. Legal consultations I'd had before quitting. Statements from my developers. Every piece of proof laid out cleanly and unarguably. Then Beverly did something bold. She filed a formal complaint with the state bar, accusing North Crest's legal team of knowingly pursuing a meritless claim to intimidate a former employee. When I asked if that was risky, she looked at me calmly. "Only if you're afraid," she said. "They're counting on you being afraid." The response was immediate. Patricia called within days, asking for a meeting. Neutral location. No theatrics. I brought Beverly. Patricia looked exhausted. Older somehow. "We're withdrawing the demand," she said. "And we'll issue a formal statement acknowledging you developed the system independently." In exchange, Beverly asked. "You drop the bar complaint?" "No." "Non-disparagement agreement," I added. Patricia nodded. "Agreed." As we stood to leave, she stopped me. "The board terminated Gerald yesterday," she said quietly. "Effective immediately." I felt relief, but also something heavier. "They're investigating the past decade of his conduct," she continued. "What they're finding is disturbing." I believed her. Before we parted, Patricia asked if I would consider consulting for North Crest, helping them redesign how innovation proposals were evaluated. "I'll think about it," I said. I wasn't sure if I ever wanted to step back into that building again. The fallout spread fast. Industry articles. Social media threads. Former employees coming forward with their own stories. Gerald vanished from public view. And just when I thought the chapter was closed, I received an email from someone named Thomas. He said he was Gerald's nephew. He wanted to talk. Beverly advised against it. But something in his message felt different. We met in a public cafe. Beverly came with me. Thomas was nervous. Younger than I expected. He told us about something that changed how I saw everything. 20 years earlier, Gerald had built a groundbreaking medical diagnostic tool while working at a hospital. When it succeeded, the institution took it from him, gave it to someone else, and cut him out completely. He never recovered. That's when he changed, Thomas said. He decided no one else would ever outshine him again. It didn't excuse anything. But it explained the fear. Thomas told me Gerald was dying. Pancreatic cancer. Months, maybe. He wanted to apologize, Thomas said. He just didn't know how. I went home and sat with that for days. Eventually, I wrote Gerald a letter. Not forgiveness. Not absolution. Just acknowledgement. I told him I understood where his fear came from, even if I couldn't accept what he'd done. A week later, he wrote back. Thank you. I'm glad you succeeded. I hope you help others do the same. That was the last time we spoke. 3 months later, I was sitting in my new office downtown, reviewing applications for the fund. Bright windows. Simple furniture. 2 associates who reminded me of myself before everything hardened. Over 200 applications in the first quarter. Stories of rejection. Frustration. Potential wasted. Then I read Bethany's application. A nurse in Phoenix. A patient monitoring system that could predict complications hours early. Rejected because it might replace human judgment. I called her that afternoon. When I told her we wanted to fund her, she cried. So did I. Once Bethany came on board, everything accelerated. What had started as an idea became real momentum. Not hype, not headlines, but motion. Prototypes built. Teams formed. Problems finally taken seriously by people who had the power to do something about them. Bethany wasn't the only one. By the end of the fund's first 6 months, we had invested in 12 founders. An environmental scientist with a water filtration breakthrough that had been shelved because it threatened an existing contract. A public school teacher who created an adaptive learning platform and was told innovation wasn't part of her role. A mechanic who redesigned a critical engine component and was laughed out of a meeting because he didn't have an engineering degree. Every story followed the same pattern. Brilliant idea. Clear evidence. One gatekeeper with too much ego and too little vision. Watching these founders build felt different than building Streamline ever had. This wasn't about proving anyone wrong. This was about unlocking people who had been held down for no reason other than someone else's insecurity. And then the press came back. A journalist named Marcus reached out, saying he was working on a national feature about niche angel funds. He wanted to understand why ours existed. What makes your fund different? He asked during our call. I didn't sugarcoat it. We fund people who were rejected for the wrong reasons, I said. Not because the idea failed, but because someone felt threatened. He paused. That's a very specific mission. It's personal, I said. He asked for my full story. Not the viral version. Not the neat one. Everything. I hesitated. I had been careful up to that point. Controlled. Strategic. But something told me it was time. I told him about the boardroom. Gerald's laughter. Walking out with nothing but conviction. Building Streamline from scratch. The acquisition. The card. The fallout. The lawsuit threat. The letter from Gerald before he died. Marcus didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. That's not a business story, he said. That's a cultural one. The article came out 6 weeks later. It exploded. Not because of the money, though that caught attention, but because people recognized themselves in the story. The headline framed it perfectly. From humiliation to $100 million exit. From rejection to rebuilding the system itself. Applications flooded in. Hundreds turned into 500. Journalists called. Conference organizers emailed. Venture firms asked to partner. But the most meaningful responses came quietly. Bethany sent me a video from a hospital in Phoenix. Her system was live. Already flagging early warning signs doctors had missed. A teacher emailed to say test scores had risen across an entire district. An environmental nonprofit wrote to tell us clean water was flowing in 3 villages for the first time. These weren't exits. These were lives. That realization rewired something in me. 8 months earlier, I had wanted revenge. Validation. Proof. Now, I wanted scale. Not for profit alone, but for impact. That fall, I was invited to speak at a technology conference in San Francisco. Over 1,000 people in the audience. Faces filled with ambition and doubt. I told them the truth. I told them revenge feels good, but it fades fast. That the real win isn't proving someone wrong, it's building something so meaningful their opinion stops mattering. I talked about the fund. About founders being dismissed because they didn't fit someone else's definition of credible. About how innovation dies quietly every day because fear is easier than change. People stood when I finished. Some cried. Others waited in line just to say thank you. One woman stayed behind. She worked in pharmaceuticals. Had built a drug delivery system that reduced chemotherapy side effects. Her supervisor buried it to protect an existing product line. I was ready to give up, she said. Now I'm not. I gave her my card. Send me the proposal, I said. That night, I realized something simple and unsettling. This wasn't a phase. This wasn't a reaction. This was my work. A year after leaving North Crest, Patricia emailed me. She had stepped into a newly created role, Chief Innovation Officer. North Crest was rebuilding. New processes. New safeguards. New leadership accountability. We can't undo the past, she wrote, but we're trying to make sure it doesn't repeat. It brought me peace in a way I didn't expect. Gerald died that winter. His nephew wrote to tell me he had tried to make amends at the end. Apology letters. Phone calls. A small scholarship fund for engineering students without resources. It didn't erase the damage, but it mattered that he finally saw it. 2 years after the boardroom. I was sitting across from a young engineer named Jordan. He was 24. Nervous. Brilliant. His managers had dismissed his satellite propulsion concept as too risky. Before he started, I stopped him. Whatever happens here, I said, your idea matters. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. His presentation was exceptional. When he finished, I didn't wait. We're funding this, I said. He looked stunned. That's it? That's it. As he left, practically floating, my team gathered for our anniversary celebration. Cake. Laughter. Stories of founders who were once invisible and now unstoppable. Someone raised a glass. To Katie, they said. I shook my head. This isn't about me, I said. It's about refusing to inherit someone else's limitations. That night, I found a letter on my desk. From a former colleague of Gerald's. He wrote that before Gerald died, he talked about me often. Said I had done what he couldn't. Turned pain into something constructive. I folded the letter and put it away. Not as forgiveness. As closure. The fund stopped feeling small after that. Not because of the money, though the second round closed faster than anyone expected, but because the patterns became undeniable. The same stories kept repeating themselves across industries. Aerospace. Healthcare. Education. Energy. Different fields, same problem. Someone in power deciding innovation was dangerous because it threatened their relevance. I stopped being surprised by it. I started expecting it. Our team grew. 2 associates became 5. 5 became 10. We built systems to evaluate proposals quickly without stripping away the humanity behind them. Data mattered, but so did intent. Execution mattered, but so did resilience. I wasn't looking for perfect founders. I was looking for people who had already been tested by rejection and hadn't quit. That filter changed everything. By the end of our second year, the fund had backed 35 companies across 15 industries. Some failed, quietly and honestly, the way real attempts sometimes do. Most didn't. They survived. They adapted. They grew. But what stayed with me were not the returns or the headlines. It was the emails. Messages that came at odd hours. From people who had almost given up. From founders who said they slept better for the first time in years because someone finally believed them. One night, I stayed late at the office scrolling through updates from portfolio companies. Bethany's system had been deployed in 20 hospitals. 43 early complications detected. 43 lives changed. The adaptive learning platform was now used by 5,000 students. The water filtration system had expanded into 3 villages overseas. Those numbers sat heavier in my chest than any acquisition figure ever had. I thought back to the boardroom in Salt Lake City. The laughter. The dismissal. The moment I thought everything was over. I realized something uncomfortable. If Gerald hadn't humiliated me, I might still be sitting at North Crest, optimizing within boundaries someone else set. Comfortable. Respected enough. Safe. And completely invisible to what I was actually capable of. That didn't make what he did acceptable. But it reframed it. Pain doesn't create strength. Response does. That spring, I was invited to speak at a global innovation summit. Standing backstage, listening to the hum of thousands of conversations, I felt oddly calm. Not nervous. Not eager to impress. Grounded. When I walked onto the stage, I didn't talk about money. I didn't talk about exits. I talked about fear. About how organizations confuse control with leadership. About how talent doesn't disappear when it's ignored, it just leaves. About how the cost of crushed ideas is invisible until it's too late. I told them that rejection can either harden you into something bitter or refine you into something purposeful. And I watched people lean forward. After the talk, a line formed. Founders. Managers. Executives. One man waited until the end. Mid-40s. Well-dressed. Nervous. I fired someone last year, he said quietly. She kept pushing an idea I didn't understand. After hearing you speak, I think I might have made a mistake. I didn't judge him. I didn't lecture. Call her, I said. If it's too late to fix it, at least learn from it. That moment mattered to me more than applause. Around that time, Patricia emailed again. North Crest had implemented their Innovation Council. Early results were promising. Employees were submitting ideas without fear of retaliation. She asked if I would come in once a quarter as an external advisor. I said yes. Not for Gerald. Not for the board. For the people who were still there, hoping. Walking back into that building felt strange. Smaller. Less intimidating. I stood in a conference room where junior employees pitched ideas directly to leadership. I watched people be heard. It didn't erase the past, but it rewrote the future. One evening, almost 2 years to the day after I walked out, I went for a run in the foothills outside the city. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft oranges and purples. I stopped at the overlook, breathing hard, heart steady. I thought about who I had been. Angry. Hurt. Determined to prove someone wrong. And who I was now. Someone building space for others to be seen. My phone buzzed. A message from Jenna. remember Jordan? His propulsion startup just secured a government contract. He asked me to thank you. I smiled. That was the reward. Not revenge. Continuity. The second anniversary of the day I walked out of North Crest arrived quietly. No headlines. No viral moments. Just a Tuesday morning like any other. I woke up early, went for a run through the foothills, and let the rhythm of my breath settle my thoughts. Salt Lake City stretched out below me, familiar and changed at the same time. So was I. At the office, my team had planned something small. Coffee. Cake. A few handwritten notes from founders we'd funded over the past 2 years. Nothing flashy. Nothing performative. It was perfect. Before the celebration, I had one meeting on my calendar. A young engineer named Jordan had flown in from Seattle to pitch his idea. He was 24, freshly out of school, working at an aerospace company that didn't take him seriously yet. When he walked into the conference room, I recognized the posture immediately. Straight-backed but tense. Over-prepared. Expecting resistance. Before he started, I stopped him. Whatever happens here, I said gently, your idea has value. Even if no one before me treated it that way. His shoulders dropped, just a little. His presentation was brilliant. Not polished for show, but thoughtful, rigorous, built from months of quiet work and stubborn belief. He had solved a real problem. One his managers had dismissed because it sounded risky. When he finished, I didn't ask for revisions. I didn't ask him to wait. We're going to fund this, I said. He blinked. That's it? That's it. He left the room almost floating. And I sat there for a moment, letting the symmetry of it sink in. Later that afternoon, we gathered in the break area. Someone raised a glass and joked about how everything started with one badly handled meeting. They toasted me. I shook my head. This was never about proving someone wrong, I said. It was about refusing to inherit someone else's fear. As the room emptied, I went back to my office and found an envelope on my desk. Hand-delivered. Inside was a letter from someone I didn't know. A former colleague of Gerald's. He wrote that in his final months, Gerald talked about me often. Not with bitterness. With regret. He said I had done what he couldn't. Turned being hurt into something constructive instead of destructive. I folded the letter and put it away. Not as forgiveness. As closure. That night, alone in my office, I looked around at the walls. Photos of founders we'd supported. Notes taped to corkboards. Headlines I never asked for. Metrics that mattered far more than money ever had. Bethany's system was now in dozens of hospitals. The adaptive learning platform had reached thousands of students. Clean water flowed where it hadn't before. I thought back to that boardroom. Gerald's laughter. The humiliation. The certainty that my career was over. If someone had told me then that walking away would lead here, I would have laughed too. But walking away wasn't the end. It was the beginning of choosing myself. Of building something that didn't require permission. Of creating a space where being dismissed didn't mean being defeated. The sweetest part of the story was never the thank you card. It was watching people rise who might have disappeared if no one had opened the door. That was the real victory.